Grimm's Fairy Tales by the Brothers Grimm. The Golden Goose. There was a man who had 3 sons, the youngest of whom was called Dummling, and was despised, mocked, and sneered at on every occasion. It happened that the eldest wanted to go into the forest to hew wood, and before he went, his mother gave him a beautiful sweet cake and a bottle of wine, in order that he might not suffer from hunger or thirst. When he entered the forest, he met a little gray-haired old man who bade him a good day, and said, "Do give me a piece of cake out of your pocket, and let me have a draught of your wine. I am so hungry and thirsty." But the clever son answered, "If I give you my cake and wine, I shall have none for myself. Be off with you." And he left the little man standing and went on. But when he began to hew down a tree, it was not long before he made a false stroke, and the axe cut him in the arm, so that he had to go home and have it bound up. And this was the little gray man's doing. After this, the second son went into the forest, and his mother gave him, like the eldest, a cake and a bottle of wine. The little old gray man met him likewise, and asked him for a piece of cake and a drink of wine. But the second son, too, said sensibly enough, "What I give you will be taken away from myself. Be off." And he left the little man standing and went on. His punishment, however, was not delayed. When he had made a few blows at the tree, he struck himself in the leg, so that he had to be carried home. Then Dummling said, "Father, do let me go and cut wood." The father answered, "Your brothers have hurt themselves with it. Leave it alone. You do not understand anything about it." But Dummling begged so long that at last he said, "Just go then. You'll get wiser by hurting yourself." His mother gave him a cake made with water and baked in the cinders, and with it a bottle of sour beer. When he came to the forest, the little old gray man met him likewise, and greeting him said, "Give me a piece of your cake and a drink out of your bottle. I am so hungry and thirsty." Dummling answered, "I have only cinder cake and sour beer. If that pleases you, we will sit down and eat." So they sat down, and when Dummling pulled out his cinder cake, it was a fine sweet cake, and the sour beer had become good wine. So they ate and drank, and after that the little man said, "Since you have a good heart, and are willing to divide what you have, I will give you good luck. There stands an old tree. Cut it down, and you will find something at the roots." Then the little man took leave of him. Dummling went and cut down the tree, and when it fell there was a goose sitting in the roots with feathers of pure gold. He lifted her up, and taking her with him, went to an inn where he thought he would stay the night. Now, the host had 3 daughters, who saw the goose and were curious to know what such a wonderful bird might be, and would have liked to have one of its golden feathers. The eldest thought, "I shall soon find an opportunity of pulling out a feather." And as soon as Dummling had gone out, she seized the goose by the wing, but her finger and hand remained sticking fast to it. The second came soon afterwards, thinking only of how she might get a feather for herself, but she had scarcely touched her sister than she was held fast. At last the third also came with the like intent, and the others screamed out, "Keep away! For goodness' sake, keep away!" But she did not understand why she was to keep away. The others are there, she thought. I may as well be there too, and ran to them, but as soon as she had touched her sister, she remained sticking fast to her. So they had to spend the night with the goose. The next morning, Dumpling took the goose under his arm and set out without troubling himself about the 3 girls who were hanging onto it. They were obliged to run after him continually, now left, now right, wherever his legs took him. In the middle of the fields, the parson met them, and when he saw the procession, he said, "For shame, you good-for-nothing girls, why are you running across the fields after this young man? Is that seemly?" At the same time, he seized the youngest by the hand in order to pull her away, but as soon as he touched her, he likewise stuck fast, and was himself obliged to run behind. Before long, the sexton came by and saw his master, the parson, running behind 3 girls. He was astonished at this and called out, "Hi, your reverence, whither away so quickly? Do not forget that we have a christening today." And running after him, he took him by the sleeve, but was also held fast to it. Whilst the 5 were trotting, thus one behind the other, 2 labourers came with their hoes from the field. The parson called out to them and begged that they would set him and the sexton free. But they had scarcely touched the sexton when they were held fast, and now there were 7 of them running behind Dumpling and the goose. Soon afterwards he came to a city where a king ruled who had a daughter who was so serious that no one could make her laugh. So he had put forth a decree that whoever should be able to make her laugh should marry her. When Dumpling heard this, he went with his goose and all her train before the king's daughter, and as soon as she saw the 7 people running on and on, one behind the other, she began to laugh quite loudly, and as if she would never stop. Thereupon Dumpling asked to have her for his wife, but the king did not like the son-in-law, and made all manner of excuses, and said he must first produce a man who could drink a cellarful of wine. Dumpling thought of the little grey man, who could certainly help him. So he went into the forest, and in the same place where he had felled the tree, he saw a man sitting, who had quite a sorrowful face. Dumpling asked him what he was taking to heart so sorely, and he answered, "I have such a great thirst, and cannot quench it. Cold water I cannot stand. A barrel of wine I have just emptied, but that to me is like a drop on a hot stone." "There I can help you," said Dumpling. "Just come with me, and you shall be satisfied." He led him into the king's cellar, and the man bent over the huge barrels and drank till his loins hurt, and before the day was out he had emptied all the barrels. Then Dumpling asked once more for his bride, but the king was vexed that such an ugly fellow, whom everyone called Dumpling, should take away his daughter, and he made a new condition. He must first find a man who could eat a whole mountain of bread. Dumpling did not think long, but went straight into the forest, where in the same place there sat a man who was tying up his body with a strap, and making an awful face, and saying, "I have eaten a whole oven full of rolls, but what good is that when one has such a hunger as I? My stomach remains empty, and I must tie myself up if I am not to die of hunger." At this Dumpling was glad, and said, "Get up and come with me. You shall eat yourself full." He led him to the king's palace, where all the flour in the whole kingdom was collected, and from it he caused a huge mountain of bread to be baked. The man from the forest stood before it, began to eat, and by the end of one day the whole mountain had vanished. Then Dumpling for the 3rd time asked for his bride, but the king again sought a way out, and ordered a ship which could sail on land and on water. "As soon as you come sailing back in it," said he, "you shall have my daughter for wife." Dumpling went straight into the forest, and there sat the little grey man to whom he had given his cake. When he heard what Dumpling wanted, he said, "Since you have given me to eat and to drink, I will give you the ship, and I do all this because you once were kind to me." Then he gave him the ship, which could sail on land and water, and when the king saw that, he could no longer prevent him from having his daughter. The wedding was celebrated, and after the king's death, Dumpling inherited his kingdom and lived for a long time contentedly with his wife. Grimm's Fairy Tales by the Brothers Grimm. Rumplestiltskin. By the side of a wood, in a country a long way off, ran a fine stream of water, and upon the stream there stood a mill. The miller's house was close by, and the miller, you must know, had a very beautiful daughter. She was moreover very shrewd and clever, and the miller was so proud of her that he one day told the king of the land, who used to come and hunt in the wood, that his daughter could spin gold out of straw. Now, this king was very fond of money, and when he heard the miller's boast, his greediness was raised, and he sent for the girl to be brought before him. Then he led her to a chamber in his palace, where there was a great heap of straw, and gave her a spinning wheel, and said, "All this must be spun into gold before morning, as you love your life." It was in vain that the poor maiden said that it was only a silly boast of her father, for that she could do no such thing as spin straw into gold. The chamber door was locked, and she was left alone. She sat down in one corner of the room, and began to bewail her hard fate, when on a sudden the door opened, and a droll-looking little man hobbled in and said,
"Good morrow to you, my good lass. What are you weeping for?"
"Alas," she said, "I must spin this straw into gold, and I know not how."
"What will you give me," said the hobgoblin, "to do it for you?"
"My necklace," replied the maiden. He took her at her word, and sat himself down to the wheel and whistled as he sang.
"Round about, lo and behold, reel away, straw into gold."
And round about the wheel went merrily. The work was quickly done, and the straw was all spun into gold. When the king came and saw this, he was greatly astonished and pleased, but his heart grew still more greedy of gain, and he shut up the poor miller's daughter again with a fresh task. Then she knew not what to do, and sat down once more to weep, but the dwarf soon opened the door, and said,
"What will you give me to do your task?"
"The ring on my finger," she said. So her little friend took the ring, and began to work at the wheel again, and whistled and sang.
"Round about, lo and behold, reel away, straw into gold."
Till long before morning all was done again. The king was greatly delighted to see all this glittering treasure, but still he had not enough. So he took the miller's daughter to yet a larger heap, and said, "All this must be spun tonight, and if it is, you shall be my queen." As soon as she was alone, that dwarf came in and said,
"What will you give me to spin gold for you this time?"
"I have nothing left," said she.
"Then say you will give me," said the little man, "the first little child that you may have when you are queen."
"That may never be," thought the miller's daughter, and as she knew no other way to get her task done, she said she would do what he asked. Round went the wheel again to the old song, and the mannequin once more spun the heap into gold. The king came in the morning, and, finding all he wanted, was forced to keep his word, so he married the miller's daughter, and she really became queen. At the birth of her first little child, she was very glad and forgot the dwarf and what she had said. But one day he came into her room where she was sitting and playing with her baby, and put her in mind of it. Then she grieved sorely at her misfortune, and said she would give him all the wealth of the kingdom if he would let her off, but in vain. Till at last her tears softened him, and he said,
"I will give you 3 days' grace, and if during that time you can tell me my name, you shall keep your child."
Now the queen lay awake all night, thinking of all the odd names she had ever heard, and she sent messengers all over the land to find out new ones. The next day the little man came, and she began with Timothy, Ichabod, Benjamin, Jeremiah, and all the names she could remember. But to all and each of them he said,
"Madam, that is not my name."
The second day she began with all the comical names she could hear of, Bandy-Legs, Hunchback, Crookshanks, and so on. But the little gentleman still said to every one of them,
"Madam, that is not my name."
The third day one of the messengers came back and said, "I have traveled 2 days without hearing of any other names, but yesterday, as I was climbing a high hill, among the trees of the forest where the fox and the hare bid each other good night, I saw a little hut, and before the hut burnt a fire, and round about the fire a funny little dwarf was dancing upon one leg and singing.
"Merrily the feast I'll make. Today I'll brew, tomorrow bake. Merrily I'll dance and sing. For next day will a stranger bring. Little does my lady dream, Rumplestiltskin is my name."
When the queen heard this, she jumped for joy, and as soon as her little friend came, she sat down upon her throne and called all her court round to enjoy the fun, and the nurse stood by her side with the baby in her arms, as if it was quite ready to be given up. Then the little man began to chuckle at the thought of having the poor child to take home with him to his hut in the woods, and he cried out,
"Now, lady, what is my name?"
"Is it John?" asked she.
"No, madam."
"Is it Tom?"
"No, madam."
"Is it Jemmy?"
"It is not."
"Can your name be Rumplestiltskin?" said the lady slyly.
"Some witch told you that! Some witch told you that!"
cried the little man, and dashed his right foot in a rage so deep into the floor that he was forced to lay hold of it with both hands to pull it out. Then he made the best of his way off, while the nurse laughed and the baby crowed, and all the court jeered at him for having had so much trouble for nothing, and said, "We wish you a very good morning, and a merry feast, Mr. Rumplestiltskin." Grimm's Fairy Tales by the Brothers Grimm. Tom Thumb. A poor woodman sat in his cottage one night, smoking his pipe by the fireside, while his wife sat by his side spinning. "How lonely it is, wife," said he, as he puffed out a long curl of smoke. "For you and me to sit here by ourselves without any children to play about and amuse us, while other people seem so happy and merry with their children." "What you say is very true," said the wife, sighing and turning round her wheel. "How happy should I be if I had but one child? If it were ever so small, nay, if it were no bigger than my thumb, I should be very happy and love it dearly." Now, odd as you may think it, it came to pass that this good woman's wish was fulfilled, just in the very way she had wished it. For not long afterwards, she had a little boy, who was quite healthy and strong, but was not much bigger than my thumb. So they said, "Well, we cannot say we have not got what we wished for, and little as he is, we will love him dearly." And they called him Thomas Thumb. They gave him plenty of food, yet for all they could do, he never grew bigger, but kept just the same size as he had been when he was born. Still, his eyes were sharp and sparkling, and he soon showed himself to be a clever little fellow who always knew well what he was about. One day, as the woodman was getting ready to go into the wood to cut fuel, he said, "I wish I had someone to bring the cart after me, for I want to make haste." "Oh, father," cried Tom, "I'll take care of that. The cart shall be in the wood by the time you want it." Then the woodman laughed and said, "How can that be? You cannot reach up to the horse's bridle." "Never mind that, father," said Tom. "If my mother will only harness the horse, I will get into his ear and tell him which way to go." "Well," said the father, "we'll try for once." When the time came, the mother harnessed the horse to the cart and put Tom into his ear, and as he sat there, the little man told the beast how to go, crying out, "Go on," and "Stop," as he wanted. And thus the horse went on just as well as if the woodman had driven it himself into the wood. It happened that as the horse was going a little too fast, and Tom was calling out, "Gently, gently," two strangers came up. "What an odd thing that is," said one. "There is a cart going along, and I hear a carter talking to the horse, but yet I can see no one." "That is queer indeed," said the other. "Let us follow the cart and see where it goes." So they went on into the wood, till at last they came to the place where the woodman was. Then Tom Thumb, seeing his father, cried out, "See, father, here I am with the cart, all right and safe. Now take me down." So his father took hold of the horse with one hand, and with the other took his son out of the horse's ear, and put him down upon a straw, where he sat as merry as you please. The two strangers were all this time looking on, and did not know what to say for wonder. At last one took the other aside and said, "That little urchin will make our fortune if we can get him and carry him about from town to town as a show. We must buy him." So they went up to the woodman and asked him what he would take for the little man. "He will be better off," said they, "with us than with you." "I won't sell him at all," said the father. "My own flesh and blood is dearer to me than all the silver and gold in the world." But Tom, hearing of the bargain they wanted to make, crept up his father's coat to his shoulder and whispered in his ear, "Take the money, father, and let them have me. I'll soon come back to you." So the woodman at last said he would sell Tom to the strangers for a large piece of gold, and they paid the price. "Where would you like to sit?" said one of them. "Oh, put me on the rim of your hat. That'll be a nice gallery for me. I can walk about there and see the country as we go along." So they did as he wished, and when Tom had taken leave of his father, they took him away with them. They journeyed on till it began to be dusky, and then the little man said, Let me down, I'm tired." So the man took off his hat and put him down on a clod of earth, in a plowed field by the side of the road. But Tom ran amongst the furrows, and at last slipped into an old mouse hole. "Good night, my masters," said he. "I'm off. Mind and look sharp after me next time." Then they ran at once to the place, and poked the ends of their sticks into the mouse hole, but all in vain. Tom only crawled farther and farther in, and at last it became quite dark, so that they were forced to go their way without their prize, as sulky as could be. When Tom found they were gone, he came out of his hiding place. "What dangerous walking it is," said he. "In this plowed field, if I were to fall from one of these great clods, I should undoubtedly break my neck." At last, by good luck, he found a large empty snail shell. "This is lucky," said he. "I can sleep here very well." And in he crept. Just as he was falling asleep, he heard two men passing by, chattering together, and one said to the other, "How can we rob that rich parson's house of his silver and gold?" "I'll tell you," cried Tom. "What noise was that?" said the thief, frightened. "I'm sure I heard someone speak." They stood still listening, and Tom said, "Take me with you, and I'll soon show you how you can get the parson's money." "But where are you?" said they. "Look about on the ground," answered he, "and listen where the sound comes from." At last the thieves found him out, and lifted him upon their hands. "You little urchin," said they. "What can you do for us?" "Why, I can get between the iron window bars of the parson's house, and throw you out whatever you want." "That's a good thought," said the thieves. "Come along, we shall see what you can do." When they came to the parson's house, Tom slipped through the window bars into the room, and called out as loud as he could bawl, "Will you have all that is here?" At this the thieves were frightened, and said, "Softly, softly! Speak low, that you may not awaken anybody." But Tom seemed as if he did not understand them, and bawled out again, "How much will you have? Shall I throw it all out?" Now the cook lay in the next room, and hearing a noise, she raised herself up in her bed and listened. Meantime, the thieves were frightened, and ran off a little way, but at last they plucked up their hearts and said, "The little urchin is only trying to make fools of us." So they came back and whispered softly to him, saying, "Now let us have no more of your roguish jokes, but throw us some of the money." Then Tom called out as loud as he could, "Very well, hold your hands, here it comes." The cook heard this quite plain, so she sprang out of bed and ran to open the door. The thieves ran off as if a wolf was at their tails, and the maid, having groped about and found nothing, went away for a light. By the time she came back, Tom had slipped off into the barn, and when she had looked about and searched every hole and corner and found nobody, she went to bed, thinking she must have been dreaming with her eyes open. The little man crawled about in the hayloft, and at last found a snug place to finish his night's rest in, so he laid himself down, meaning to sleep till daylight, and then find his way home to his father and mother. But alas, how woefully he was undone! What crosses and sorrows happen to us all in this world! The cook got up early, before daybreak, to feed the cows, and going straight to the hayloft, carried away a large bundle of hay, with the little man in the middle of it, fast asleep. He still, however, slept on, and did not awake till he found himself in the mouth of the cow, for the cook had put the hay into the cow's rick, and the cow had taken Tom up in a mouthful of it. "Good lack a day," said he. "How came I to tumble into the mill?" But he soon found out where he really was, and was forced to have all his wits about him, that he might not get between the cow's teeth and so be crushed to death. At last down he went into her stomach. "It is rather dark," said he. "They forgot to build windows in this room to let the sun in. A candle would be no bad thing." Though he made the best of his bad luck, he did not like his quarters at all, and the worst of it was that more and more hay was always coming down, and the space left for him became smaller and smaller. At last he cried out as loud as he could, "Don't bring any more hay! Don't bring any more hay!" The maid happened to be just then milking the cow, and hearing someone speak, but seeing nobody, and yet being quite sure it was the same voice that she had heard in the night. She was so frightened that she fell off her stool and overset the milk pail. As soon as she could pick herself up out of the dirt, she ran off as fast as she could to her master the parson, and said, Sir, the cow is talking." But the parson said, "Woman, thou art surely mad." However, he went with her into the cow-house to try and see what was the matter. Scarcely had they set foot on the threshold when Tom called out, "Don't bring any more hay!" Then the parson himself was frightened, and thinking the cow was surely bewitched, told his man to kill her on the spot. So the cow was killed and cut up, and the stomach, in which Tom lay, was thrown out upon a dunghill. Tom soon set himself to work to get out, which was not a very easy task, but at last, just as he had made room for his head to get out, fresh ill luck befell him. A hungry wolf sprang out and swallowed up the whole stomach, with Tom in it, at one gulp, and ran away. Tom, however, was still not disheartened, and thinking the wolf would not dislike having some chat with him as he was going along, he called out, "My good friend, I can show you a famous treat." "Where's that?" said the wolf. "In such and such a house," said Tom, describing his own father's house. "You can crawl through the drain into the kitchen and then into the pantry, and there you'll find cakes, ham, beef, cold chicken, roast pig, apple dumplings, and everything that your heart can wish." The wolf did not want to be asked twice, so that very night he went to the house and crawled through the drain into the kitchen, and then into the pantry, and ate and drank there to his heart's content. As soon as he had had enough, he wanted to get away, but he had eaten so much that he could not go out but the same way he came in. This was just what Tom had reckoned upon, and now he began to set up a great shout, making all the noise he could. "Will you be easy?" said the wolf. "You'll awaken everybody in the house if you make such a clatter." "What's that to me?" said the little man. "You have had your frolic, now I've a mind to be merry myself." And he began singing and shouting as loud as he could. The woodman and his wife, being awakened by the noise, peeped through a crack in the door, but when they saw a wolf was there, you may well suppose that they were sadly frightened, and the woodman ran for his axe and gave his wife a scythe. "Do you stay behind," said the woodman, "and when I have knocked him on the head, you must rip him up with the scythe." Tom heard all this and cried out, "Father, father, I am here! The wolf has swallowed me!" And his father said, "Heaven be praised! We have found our dear child again." And he told his wife not to use the scythe, for fear she should hurt him. Then he aimed a great blow, and struck the wolf on the head, and killed him on the spot. And when he was dead, they cut open his body and set Tommy free. "Ah," said the father, "what fears we have had for you." "Yes, father," answered he. "I have travelled all over the world, I think, in one way or other, since we parted, and now I am very glad to come home and get fresh air again." "Why, where have you been?" said his father. "I've been in a mouse hole, and in a snail shell, and down a cow's throat, and in the wolf's belly, and yet here I am again, safe and sound." "Well," said they, "you are come back, and we will not sell you again for all the riches in the world." Then they hugged and kissed their dear little son, and gave him plenty to eat and drink, for he was very hungry. And then they fetched new clothes for him, for his old ones had been quite spoiled on his journey. So Master Thumb stayed at home with his father and mother in peace, for though he had been so great a traveller, and had done and seen so many fine things, and was fond enough of telling the whole story, he always agreed that, after all, there is no place like home. Grimm's Fairy Tales by the Brothers Grimm. The Goose Girl. The king of a great land died and left his queen to take care of their only child. This child was a daughter who was very beautiful, and her mother loved her dearly and was very kind to her. And there was a good fairy, too, who was fond of the princess and helped her mother to watch over her. When she grew up, she was betrothed to a prince who lived a great way off, and as the time drew near for her to be married, she got ready to set off on her journey to his country. Then the queen, her mother, packed up a great many costly things, jewels and gold and silver, trinkets, fine dresses, and in short everything that became a royal bride. And she gave her a waiting maid to ride with her and give her into the bridegroom's hands, and each had a horse for the journey. Now the princess's horse was the fairy's gift, and it was called Falada and could speak. When the time came for them to set out, the fairy went into her bedchamber and took a little knife, cut off a lock of her hair, and gave it to the princess and said, "Take care of it, dear child, for it is a charm that may be of use to you on the road." Then they all took a sorrowful leave of the princess, and she put the lock of hair into her bosom, got upon her horse, and set off on her journey to her bridegroom's kingdom. One day, as they were riding along by a brook, the princess began to feel very thirsty, and she said to her maid, "Pray get down and fetch me some water in my golden cup out of yonder brook, for I want to drink." "Nay," said the maid. "If you are thirsty, get off yourself and stoop down by the water and drink. I shall not be your waiting maid any longer." Then she was so thirsty that she got down and knelt over the little brook and drank, for she was frightened, and dared not to bring out her golden cup, and she wept and said, "Alas, what will become of me?" And the lock answered her and said, "Alas, alas, if thy mother knew it, sadly, sadly she would rue it." But the princess was very gentle and meek, so she said nothing to her maid's ill behavior, but got upon her horse again. Then all rode farther on their journey, till the day grew so warm and the sun so scorching that the bride began to feel very thirsty again, and at last, when they came to a river, she forgot her maid's rude speech, and said, "Pray get down and fetch me some water in my golden cup." But the maid answered her, and spoke even more haughtily than before. "Drink if you will, but I shall not be your waiting maid." Then the princess was so thirsty that she got off her horse and lay down and held her head over the running stream and cried and said, "What will become of me?" And the lock of hair answered her again, Alas, alas, if thy mother knew it, sadly, sadly she would rue it. And as she leaned down to drink, the lock of hair fell from her bosom and floated away with the water. Now, she was so frightened that she did not see it, but her maid saw it, and was very glad, for she knew the charm, and she saw that the poor bride would be in her power now that she had lost the hair. So when the bride had done drinking and would have got upon Falada again, the maid said, "I shall ride upon Falada, and you may have my horse instead." So she was forced to give up her horse, and soon afterwards to take off her royal clothes and put on her maid's shabby ones. At last, as they drew near the end of their journey, this treacherous servant threatened to kill her mistress if she ever told anyone what had happened. But Falada saw it all, and marked it well. Then the waiting maid got upon Falada, and the real bride rode upon the other horse, and they went on in this way till at last they came to the royal court. There was great joy at their coming, and the prince flew to meet them, and lifted the maid from her horse, thinking she was the one who was to be his wife, and she was led upstairs to the royal chamber, but the true princess was told to stay in the court below. Now, the old king happened just then to have nothing else to do, so he amused himself by sitting at his kitchen window, looking at what was going on, and he saw her in the courtyard. As she looked very pretty and too delicate for a waiting maid, he went up into the royal chamber to ask the bride who it was she had brought with her, that was thus left standing in the court below. "I brought her with me for the sake of her company on the road," she said. "Pray give the girl some work to do, that she may not be idle." The old king could not for some time think of any work for her to do, but at last he said, "I have a lad who takes care of my geese. She may go and help him." Now, the name of this lad, that the real bride was to help in watching the king's geese, was Curdken. But the false bride said to the prince, "Dear husband, pray do me one piece of kindness." "That I will," said the prince. "Then tell one of your slaughterers to cut the head off the horse I rode upon, for it was very unruly and plagued me sadly on the road." But the truth was she was very much afraid lest Falada should some day or other speak and tell all she had done to the princess. She carried her point, and the faithful Falada was killed. But when the true princess heard of it, she wept and begged the man to nail up Falada's head against a large dark gate of the city, through which she had to pass every morning and evening, that there she might still see him sometimes. Then the slaughterer said he would do as she wished, and cut off the head and nailed it up under the dark gate. Early the next morning, as she and Curdken went out through the gate, she said sorrowfully, "Falada, Falada, there thou hangest." And the head answered, "Bride, bride, there thou gangest. Alas, alas, if thy mother knew it, sadly, sadly she would rue it." Then they went out of the city and drove the geese on. And when she came to the meadow, she sat down upon a bank there and let down her waving locks of hair, which were all of pure silver. And when Curdken saw it glitter in the sun, he ran up and would have pulled some of the locks out, but she cried, "Blow, breezes, blow, let Curdken's hat go. Blow, breezes, blow, let him after it go. O'er hills, dales, and rocks, away be it whirled, till the silvery locks are all combed and curled." Then there came a wind so strong that it blew off Curdken's hat, and away it flew over the hills, and he was forced to turn and run after it, till, by the time he came back, she had done combing and curling her hair, and had put it up again safe. Then he was very angry and sulky, and would not speak to her at all. But they watched the geese until it grew dark in the evening, and then drove them homewards. The next morning, as they were going through the dark gate, the poor girl looked up at Falada's head and cried, "Falada, Falada, there thou hangest." And the head answered, Bride, bride, there thou gangest, alas, alas, if thy mother knew it, sadly, sadly she would rue it. Then she drove on the geese, and sat down again in the meadow, and began to comb out her hair as before. And Curdken ran up to her, and wanted to take hold of it, but she cried out quickly, Blow, breezes, blow, let Curdken's hat go. Blow, breezes, blow, let him after it go. O'er hills, dales, and rocks, away be it whirled, till the silvery locks are all combed and curled. Then the wind came and blew away his hat, and off it flew a great way over the hills and far away, so that he had to run after it, and when he came back, she had bound up her hair again, and it was all safe. So they watched the geese till it grew dark. In the evening, after they came home, Curdken went to the old king and said, I cannot have that strange girl to help me keep the geese any longer. Why? Said the king. Because instead of doing any good, she does nothing but tease me all day long. Then the king made him tell what had happened, and Curdken said, When we go in the morning through the dark gate with our flock of geese, she cries and talks with the head of a horse that hangs upon the wall and says, Falada, Falada, there thou hangest. And the head answers, Bride, bride, there thou gangest, alas, alas, if thy mother knew it, sadly, sadly she would rue it. And Curdken went on telling the king what had happened upon the meadow where the geese fed, how his hat was blown away, and how he was forced to run after it, and to leave his flock of geese to themselves. But the old king told the boy to go out again the next day, and when the morning came, he placed himself behind the dark gate, and heard how she spoke to Falada, and how Falada answered. Then he went into the field and hid himself in a bush by the meadow's side, and he soon saw with his own eyes how they drove the flock of geese, and how, after a little time, she let down her hair that glittered in the sun, and then he heard her say, Blow, breezes, blow, let Curdken's hat go. Blow, breezes, blow, let him after it go. O'er hills, dales, and rocks, away be it whirl, till the silvery locks are all combed and curled. And soon came a gale of wind, and carried away Curdken's hat, and away went Curdken after it, while the girl went on combing and curling her hair. All this the old king saw, so he went home without being seen, and when the little Goose Girl came back in the evening, he called her aside, and asked her why she did so. But she burst into tears, and said, That I must not tell you or any man, or I shall lose my life. But the old king begged so hard that she had no peace till she had told him all the tale, from beginning to end, word for word. And it was very lucky for her that she did so, for when she had done, the king ordered royal clothes to be put upon her, and gazed on her with wonder. She was so beautiful. Then he called his son and told him that he had only a false bride, for that she was merely a waiting maid, while the true bride stood by. And the young king rejoiced when he saw her beauty, and heard how meek and patient she had been, and without saying anything to the false bride, the king ordered a great feast to be got ready for all his court. The bridegroom sat at the top, with the false princess on one side and the true one on the other. But nobody knew her again, for her beauty was quite dazzling to their eyes, and she did not seem at all like the little Goose Girl, now that she had her brilliant dress on. When they had eaten and drank and were very merry, the old king said he would tell them a tale. So he began, and told all the story of the princess, as if it was one that he had heard once before. And he asked the true waiting maid what she thought ought to be done to anyone who would behave thus. Nothing better, said this false bride, than that she should be thrown into a cask stuck round with sharp nails, and that 2 white horses should be put to it, and should drag it from street to street till she was dead. Thou art she, said the old king, and as thou hast judged thyself, so shall it be done to thee. And the young king was then married to his true wife, and they reigned over the kingdom in peace and happiness all their lives. And the good fairy came to see them, and restored the faithful Falada to life again. Grimm's Fairy Tales by the Brothers Grimm. The Frog Prince. One fine evening, a young princess put on her bonnet and clogs and went out to take a walk by herself in a wood. And when she came to a cool spring of water that rose in the midst of it, she sat herself down to rest a while. Now, she had a golden ball in her hand, which was her favorite plaything, and she was always tossing it up into the air and catching it again as it fell. After a time, she threw it up so high that she missed catching it as it fell, and the ball bounded away and rolled along upon the ground, till at last it fell down into the spring. The princess looked into the spring after her ball, but it was very deep, so deep that she could not see the bottom of it. Then she began to bewail her loss and said, "Alas, if I could only get my ball again, I would give all my fine clothes and jewels and everything that I have in the world." Whilst she was speaking, a frog put its head out of the water and said, "Princess, why do you weep so bitterly?" "Alas," said she, "what can you do for me, you nasty frog? My golden ball has fallen into the spring." The frog said, "I want not your pearls and jewels and fine clothes, but if you will love me and let me live with you and eat from off your golden plate and sleep upon your bed, I will bring you your ball again." "What nonsense," thought the princess. "This silly frog is talking. He can never even get out of the spring to visit me, though he may be able to get my ball for me, and therefore I will tell him he shall have what he asks." So she said to the frog, "Well, if you bring me my ball, I will do all you ask." Then the frog put his head down and dived deep under the water, and after a little while he came up again with the ball in his mouth and threw it on the edge of the spring. As soon as the young princess saw her ball, she ran to pick it up, and she was so overjoyed to have it in her hand again that she never even thought of the frog, but ran home with it as fast as she could. The frog called after her, "Stay, princess, and take me with you as you said." But she did not stop to hear a word. The next day, just as the princess had sat down to dinner, she heard a strange noise. Splish, splash, splish, splash, as if something was coming up the marble staircase. And soon afterwards there was a gentle knock at the door, and a little voice cried out and said, "Open the door, my princess dear, open the door to thy true love here, and mind the words that thou and I said, by the fountain cool in the greenwood shade." Then the princess ran to the door and opened it, and there she saw the frog, whom she had quite forgotten. At this sight she was sadly frightened, and shutting the door as fast as she could, came back to her seat. The king, her father, seeing that something had frightened her, asked her what was the matter. "There is a nasty frog," said she, "at the door that lifted my ball for me out of the spring this morning. I told him that he should live with me here, thinking that he could never get out of the spring, but there he is at the door, and he wants to come in." While she was speaking, the frog knocked again at the door and said, "Open the door, my princess dear, open the door to thy true love here, and mind the words that thou and I said, by the fountain cool in the greenwood shade." Then the king said to the young princess, As you have given your word, you must keep it. So go and let him in." She did so, and the frog hopped into the room and then straight on. Splish, splash, splish, splash. From the bottom of the room to the top, till he came up close to the table where the princess sat. "Pray lift me upon the chair," said he to the princess, "and let me sit next to you." As soon as she had done this, the frog said, "Put your plate nearer to me, that I may eat out of it." This she did, and when he had eaten as much as he could, he said, "Now I am tired. Carry me upstairs and put me into your bed." And the princess, though very unwilling, took him up in her hand and put him upon the pillow of her own bed, where he slept all night long. As soon as it was light, he jumped up, hopped downstairs, and went out of the house. "Now then," thought the princess, "at last he is gone, and I shall be troubled with him no more." But she was mistaken, for when night came again, she heard the same tapping at the door, and the frog came once more and said, "Open the door, my princess dear, open the door to thy true love here, and mind the words that thou and I said, by the fountain cool in the greenwood shade." And when the princess opened the door, the frog came in, and slept upon her pillow as before, till the morning broke, and the third night he did the same. But when the princess awoke on the following morning, she was astonished to see, instead of a frog, a handsome prince gazing on her with the most beautiful eyes she had ever seen, and standing at the head of her bed. He told her that he had been enchanted by a spiteful fairy, who had changed him into a frog, and that he had been fated so to abide till some princess should take him out of the spring, and let him eat from her plate, and sleep upon her bed for 3 nights. "You," said the prince, "have broken his cruel charm, and now I have nothing to wish for but that you should go with me into my father's kingdom, where I will marry you, and love you as long as you live." The young princess, you may be sure, was not long in saying yes to all this. And as they spoke, a gay coach drove up, with 8 beautiful horses, decked with plumes of feathers and a golden harness, and behind the coach rode the prince's servant, faithful Heinrich, who had bewailed the misfortunes of his dear master during his enchantment so long and so bitterly that his heart had well nigh burst. They then took leave of the king, and got into the coach with 8 horses, and all set out, full of joy and merriment, for the prince's kingdom, which they reached safely, and there they lived happily a great many years.